Welcome back, everyone. Settle in. Today's explainer is an absolute roller coaster. We're traveling back thousands of years to the Indian subcontinent to unpack the dramatic, explosive, and honestly, quite tragic 70-year arc of an ancient superpower. We are, of course, talking about the Shishunaga Dynasty. This is a story packed with political ambition, brilliant geopolitical strategy, religious fracture, and a rather bloody downfall. So let's just dive right into this fascinating era, shall we? You know, there's a saying, the foundation of every new dynasty is laid upon the downfall of the previous dynasty. And as historians, we see this cyclical, often brutal nature of political power play out time and time again, right? In the ancient kingdom of Magadha, which is located in present-day Bihar, power was almost never handed over peacefully. The old guard literally had to crumble for the new order to rise. And that is exactly the chaotic environment that birthed the Shishunaga line. Okay, here's a quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll trace the rise of a new dynasty, dissect Magadha's incredible geographic advantage, and examine the conquest of Avanti. From there, we'll transition into the cultural shifts of the Second Buddhist Council before wrapping up with the empire's division and inevitable downfall. Section 1. Rise of a new dynasty. So, before there was a mighty Shishunaga dynasty, there was simply a man named Shishunaga. During the fading days of the Haryanka dynasty under King Nagadasaka, Shishunaga served as the amatya. Think of an amatya basically as the prime minister or a really high-ranking official. Now, according to the Buddhist scripture, the Mahavamsa-Tika, he was the son of a Lichavi king and the governor of Varanasi. And here's the thing, through sheer hard work, honesty, and just plain bureaucratic competence, this amatya completely won the hearts of the Magadhan people. But how does a good administrator actually become an emperor? Well, the ruling Haryanka dynasty was totally bogged down in toxic family feuds. The public was exhausted by all this instability, and they finally hit their breaking point. A massive popular revolt swept through the kingdom, completely dethroning King Nagadasaka. And in 413 BC, the people actually elevated their trusted amatya Shishunaga straight to the throne. Now, some accounts do suggest Shishunaga might have actively led this revolt himself. But regardless, 413 BC officially marks the birth of the Shishunaga dynasty. Section 2. Magadha's geographic advantage. You might be wondering what made the specific kingdom so formidable. Honestly, Shishunaga inherited a region that was practically a geographical lottery ticket. Magadha held a natural monopoly on the most crucial resources of the ancient world. I mean, they had direct access to rich iron mines for forging superior weaponry. The surrounding deep jungles gave them endless timber and war elephants, which, let's be real, were the ancient equivalent of heavy artillery. Plus, their territory expanded right across the incredibly fertile plains of the river Ganga, which meant vast, seemingly endless green reserves. They could equip a massive military force and, more importantly, feed them indefinitely. Section 3. The Conquest of Avanti. Now, for over a century, Magadha had been locked in this bitter, stubborn enmity with the neighboring Avanti kingdom, ruled by the Pradyota dynasty. Even the absolute legends of the previous Haryanka dynasty, kings like Bimbisara and Ajatshatru, just couldn't break Avanti's defenses. But Shishunaga, he was different. Leveraging that incredibly well-resourced military we just talked about, he launched a totally decisive campaign and completely shattered the dynastic rule of the Pradyotas. Succeeding where legendary kings had failed, Shishunaga folded the Avanti kingdom directly into Magadha. And he didn't stop there either. Shishunaga kept pushing his military campaigns forward, eventually absorbing the powerful Vatsa and Koshala kingdoms as well. By consolidating all these massive territories, Shishunaga didn't just win a few wars. He laid down a truly impenetrable foundation. These strategic annexations cemented Magadha as an absolute superpower on the subcontinent, locking in a dominance that would last for centuries to come. Let's look at the timeline here. Shishunaga's incredibly successful reign lasted from 413 BC until 395 BC. Upon his passing, this vast, wealthy empire was inherited by his son, Kalashoka, who you might also know as Kakavarna from Hindu scriptures. And much like his father, Kalashoka had served as the governor of Varanasi before taking the throne. But I want you to pay special attention to the year 387 BC on this timeline, because that's when Kalashoka's reign suddenly shifts our focus away from military expansion and straight into deep cultural and religious turbulence. Section 4. The Second Buddhist Council. So why is the year 387 BC so incredibly significant? Well, it marked exactly 100 years since the demise of Gautam Buddha. And in that century that followed, the Buddhist community, or the Sangha, really began to fracture. A massive conflict surged among the monks regarding the strict interpretation of monastic rules and the core disciplines of Buddhism. Recognizing the very real threat this religious schism posed to the cultural fabric of his empire, Emperor Kalashoka actually intervened. He organized the Second Buddhist Council, really hoping to bring all these quarreling factions together to debate and ideally find some unity. However, historical momentum is incredibly hard to stop. Despite Emperor Kalashoka's best diplomatic efforts and the genuinely grand scale of this council, unity was just impossible. The theological differences were simply too vast by this point. So, the Sangha officially split into two distinct competing sects, the Mahasangika on one side and the Thavira on the other. It was a massive, defining moment of religious fracture, and it happened right under the umbrella of Magadhan authority. Section 5. Division and Downfall. The number 10. This is perhaps the most tragic figure in the entire history of the Shishunaga Dynasty, because when Emperor Kalashoka's reign finally came to an end, a truly fatal political blunder occurred. Instead of naming one strong, capable successor to rule this unified Magadhan superpower, the immense responsibility of leadership fell to his 10 sons. Now, we all know you cannot slice up a superpower and expect it to survive, right? The 10 sons made the absolutely catastrophic decision to divide Magadha amongst themselves. This instantly created a sprawling, chaotic leadership vacuum. That centralized, iron-fisted military and economic control that Shishunaga had painstakingly built, it was just shattered overnight. By fracturing the empire into all these competing administrative zones, these 10 heirs fatally weakened Magadha. They stripped it of its intimidating power and practically hung up a welcome sign for any ambitious usurper looking for a hostile takeover. And sure enough, that hostile takeover arrived, and it arrived in blood. By the year 345 BC, the fractured dynasty was gasping its final breaths. Mahanananda, who was recognized as the final ruler of the Shishunaga line, met a violent, brutal end. He was assassinated by a figure named Mahapadmananda. In a single, ruthless stroke in 345 BC, 70 years of Shishunaga supremacy was just wiped from the throne, clearing the path for the terrifying rise of the Nanda Empire. But who exactly was this man who brought down such an empire? Well, as historians, we always have to examine multiple sources, and this is where the ancient texts diverge in a really fascinating way. If we look at Hindu scriptures, they record that Mahapadmananda was actually Mahanandin's own illegitimate son, born to one of his maids, so a classic, tragic tale of insider betrayal. But if we cross-reference this with Jain scriptures, an entirely different profile emerges. They claim Mahapadmananda was actually the son of a royal barber and a courtesan. Now, we look impartially at both of these ancient records, and while they obviously differ on his exact lineage, they both agree on one crucial thing. He came from the absolute fringes of the royal court to violently seize the very center of absolute power. Which leaves us with a lingering dark mystery as we close today's session. Who truly was Mahapadmananda? Was he a scorned son seeking what he believed was his birthright, or was he just a brilliantly ambitious outsider who looked at a fractured empire and seized his moment? What was his true motive in completely wiping out the Shishunaga bloodline? I want you to ponder that historical puzzle, scholars, because as we've seen today, the fall of one dynasty is really only ever the bloody beginning of the next. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep that curiosity alive until our next lecture.